Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. So here we are. The P320, highly controversial, maybe sketchy. And information has come to light very recently that has reignited the storm of controversy. Now, let's start this off by telling you this. I love SIGs. I love SIGs. Decades ago, in an extremely high threat environment, I had no hesitation to bet my life on a SIG P6. Today, I very often rely on a SIG P365 to defend my life if the worst happens. I adore my wife's SIG P238. It's a fantastic little gun. It's a great shooter. And it's just quite wonderful. This, by the way, is a P238 Legion. And Linda loves it too. And honestly, if somebody offered to trade a SIG P210 carry for my left nut, I'd think about it. I love SIGs. I don't love what's going on with the SIG P320 or how SIG is approaching this. But before we get into the weeds, I'd like to thank my supporters on Patreon. Very much a shoestring operation, and your contributions help more than you know. I'd also like to thank channel benefactors, those individuals and businesses that have helped the channel in innumerable ways and really helped make this work. And of course, as always, shout out to Rain City Shooting Center for providing material support to the channel. Now, the SIG P320. I don't own one. I've never owned one. And it's not because I thought there was anything wrong with them. It's because they're just not my cup of tea. And they did not do anything in meaningful terms that I couldn't get cheaper elsewhere if I didn't already have it. Just not my thing. And that's fine. There's a lot of guns out there. We don't have to, be turned on by all of them. But then this problem came up with uncommanded discharges. And SIG insists that these are user error. And I have never found that claim persuasive because I've watched a number of videos of these discharges and never observed that they resulted from user error, or at least not in any obvious way. Investigations of those shootings were not able to discover a way in which they were created by user error. There have been lawsuits. Quite a few of them, and SIG has lost a couple of them. And now, recently, the Air Force has temporarily withdrawn their M18s from service, pending investigation after the death of an airman. It's not looking good for SIG. And what's really not looking good is that throughout this, SIG has insisted that there's no problem and that it's user error, despite the fact, and there may be cases where it is, but there are definitely cases where it is extremely difficult for me to find that explanation plausible. So, I'll also be upfront about this. I don't know what's going on. I don't know beyond any reasonable doubt that these uncommanded discharges are not in some bizarre, improbable fashion user error. I don't know anything for sure. But we are going to get into what we do know and what has been proposed. And why SIG is screwed. So a few days ago, Wyoming Gun Project posted a video where they demonstrated a mechanism under which a SIG P320 could experience an uncommanded discharge, to the point where he was able to repeat this 5 times in succession, firing primed brass with, not a full cartridge. And a lot of people have issues with this video, which is very long. It's 40 minutes and it's very in-depth. But everyone who's articulated an issue with this video, to me, it is clear that they did not actually understand fully what he was saying. And were focused on the fact that there was a screw used in the demonstration as a substitute for a specific potential issue with the gun. But I found his findings quite persuasive. And since then, others have looked at this and been able to reproduce his results. Now, what they're not getting, what people who object to the screw are not getting, is that this simulates an error in finishing that does not necessarily exist in the specific guns that were tested, but has been verified to exist in other examples by no less source than the FBI. And that a combination of factors could produce an uncommanded discharge that is not due to user error. I'm not going to argue about that. I find it persuasive, but who the hell am I? I'm a guy with an iPhone in his garage. But I could see how it could happen, and a hell of a lot of these guns have been produced, and a very, very small percentage of them have experienced these uncommanded discharges. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. But essentially, what it looks like is that these may result from a combination of errors stacking in individual examples of the gun. It's like, so the other week, a friend of mine showed me the fire control units from three SIG P320s. One of them looked perfect, one of them looked meh, and one of them looked frankly sketchy in terms of fitting and quality control. None of them have exhibited any issues, but it does demonstrate that there are variations in quality control. Also, the FBI found that some pistols exhibited a particular flaw, which may or may not be relevant, but most didn't. And the tolerances of the fit and finish, the fit of the slide to frame in particular, are very loose and highly variable. So what it looks to me like is happening is that with so many guns produced, inevitably by sheer weight of odds, you get a series of stacking minor issues that are not significant in and of themselves that result in these uncommanded discharges. And I don't know if Wyoming Gun Project is right. I don't know if the other engineers and gunsmiths who have looked at this are right. But what everyone is missing is it doesn't matter if they're right. And I'll explain that in just a second. To explain why it doesn't matter if they're right, we have to talk about court proceedings. Now, there are two basic kinds of court proceedings where a trial by jury is involved under United States law. There are criminal proceedings, which are generally jury trials, and the standard for evidence is beyond reasonable doubt. To get a conviction, it is supposed to be beyond reasonable doubt that the suspect did not commit, that the suspect committed the crime. Okay, that's the standard for criminal proceedings. Lawsuits are civil proceedings. They have a different standard of evidence. I'm not a lawyer, but we can all understand basic legal principles. The standard for evidence in a criminal case is beyond reasonable doubt. The standard in a civil trial, i.e. a lawsuit, is the preponderance of evidence. It is a much lower standard of proof. If a jury of reasonable people look at the evidence and go, yeah, this is probably right, then they can rule in favor of the plaintiff. SIG has been the defendant in a number of lawsuits, and they've prevailed in a number of lawsuits, but they have lost too. One of the main reasons that they prevailed in these lawsuits is that no one could articulate a plausible hypothesis for how these uncommanded discharges were happening basically spontaneously. And that is a strong factor in defense in a civil trial, in a lawsuit, because you have to make the jury understand how the bad thing happened. And you only have, but because of the standards of evidence, the preponderance of evidence, you only have to have a plausible explanation. You do not have to demonstrate that it is correct, merely that it is plausible to a jury of average Americans. And SIG lost 2 cases despite not having a hypothesis for how this could occur mechanically. And they've won quite a few because nobody could articulate how it could happen. We now have a plausible hypothesis that a decent lawyer can articulate to a jury in a way that they understand. We now even have a second hypothesis for how this could happen under a completely different set of circumstances. It is also plausible and easy to articulate, which means if the plaintiff's lawyers are at all competent, SIG is going to start losing lawsuits. And when people see SIG is losing lawsuits, they're going to pile on. Anybody who owns a P320 can pile on. They don't have to have experienced an uncommanded discharge. And this is why I say SIG is screwed, because SIG is screwed. And they're not helping themselves. There have been several quality control issues that have come up with SIG products recently other than the P310. And SIG has responded in every case with denial and obstruction until various people rammed proof of the problem down their throats in a way that they couldn't blow off. This is a very bad optic. It makes the gun buying public feel bad about SIG. And feelings are important in a civil proceeding. So they've already established a precedent of obstruction and denial and been proven wrong in those cases. I'm not going to get into the details on that. It's just I watched it happen and followed it with interest because I really like SIGs. But they behaved badly, got caught doing it, and were forced to correct the issues. And a jury is going to be informed of those instances and take them into account. Now, on the P320, in the face of the last few days' new information and renewed controversy, SIG has doubled down. A friend of mine forwarded me an email he received from SIG, rather inexplicably because he's not a SIG owner, where they explain their position. And they do so by saying things that are only true if you look at them just right. They claim that all the services continue to use the M18. And technically, they're correct, because the Air Force has only temporarily withdrawn them from service pending investigation. So they're technically telling the truth, but they're doing it in a way that is a lie. They mention the FBI's examination of it without citing the things that the FBI noticed that could contribute to the problem. They act as if the FBI gave them a blanket absolution from this problem, and they did not. So basically, they're lying by implication and omission, but technically telling the truth. That's not a good optic, and people are noticing it and commenting on it publicly. If SIG had just dealt with this appropriately to begin with, this wouldn't be happening. Now, SIG did have to make a correction on the P320 to make it drop safe. Excrement occurs. Fine. The point is they did it. They didn't do a recall. because the optics of that were probably judged to be too bad. They did it as a voluntary upgrade program. And fine, I think it would have been more honest to do a recall, but it's fine. But anyone looking at their customer service behavior and how they've dealt with issues for the last several years can't help but look sideways at their claims now, because they've made such claims in the past and been proven wrong and had to fix it. So, are there uncommanded discharges happening with SIG P320s? Yes. Very, very few of a very, very large number of guns. But they have indisputably happened. The instances that I care about, I cannot see any way that they are caused by user error, and neither have the parties who investigated these instances been able to determine that it was a result of user error. SIG claims it was user error, and they do not support this claim with any evidence. Now, part of the reason this issue has gone on for so long is that there are so many guns, and many of them have been used for a long time without any issues, and there have been very few problems in relation to the number of guns sold. But in a way, that makes the current hypotheses that have been proposed for how it's happening more, not less, probable, because they would require a perfect storm of stacking issues to exist in a single gun. And that's not going to happen often. Now, and I did want to add, a friend of mine who has been a pistolero and gunsmith of great repute for decades pointed out something simple. The manual of arms of the P365 is for all practical purposes identical for every other comparable striker-fired service pistol, and none of those other pistols have experienced this issue. In his opinion, this makes user error an unlikely cause for this problem, simply because if it was user error, we would see a lot more of it across a broad variety of platforms. And I find his argument persuasive. But again, all of these other issues are secondary to the simple fact that you can now propose a plausible hypothesis to juries to a mechanical issue that allows this to happen. And given SIG's poor optics on customer service in the last few years, which are going to come up, juries are going to be very, very inclined to not give SIG the benefit of the doubt. And SIG brought this on themselves. Completely. Now, I did see two different engineering assessments of the mechanisms in the safety mechanisms in the big SIG P320. And both of these gentlemen were able to articulate clearly why these are poorly engineered safeties and how they can fail. There's no getting around that. They're not wrong. They can explain it in a way that even I can see what they're explaining and go, yeah, they're right. And that's just more fuel on the funeral pyre for the P320 when it comes to civil proceedings. And please, please don't come at me with fanboy attitudes or anti-SIG feelings on this, because they're not relevant to my point. And honestly, I don't care. Okay? All I am doing is explaining the situation and the position that SIG have placed themselves in regarding to that situation. They're going to get hammered, and in my opinion, they deserve it. And that's what this all comes down to. It doesn't come down to what's right or what's wrong. It comes down to the optics and the way civil proceedings work. So, that's my hot take on this. All kudos to Wyoming Gun Project and the others that have brought their hypothesis to the public. And thank you for that. So, anyway, hopefully this is the last video I will ever make about this issue. And I hope it has been informative for you. So, I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to you again real soon.